All right, let's talk about documenting the web platform. I'm Florian Scholz, and I'm the content lead and co-founder of Open Web Docs. I'm really glad we talked about TC39 and the standardization processes and all that kind of effort. And usually what comes afterwards, so once TC39 or other standards bodies have agreed on something and browsers shipped something, then it's also time to document things. And so I want to talk about that. So what is Open Web Docs? Open Web Docs is a collective of people and organizations contributing to the betterment of open web platform documentation for the benefit of web developers worldwide. So I'm not really employed by anyone. I'm backed by an OpenCollect.com collective, which we call Open Web Docs. And on the slide, you can see the main companies that sponsor this effort. But there's also generous, lovely individuals that back us on OpenCollect.com. And if you're one of them, thank you very much. You're helping us to document web standards and spread the word about the open web. And thanks to the donations and crowdfunding from this year, we're actually a team of 4 technical writers now, and we're all working on documenting the open web. And how are we doing that? A few words on our values. So we are working on the agenda of the worldwide developers to positively impact their lives. We're not really working on any agenda of one of the sponsor companies or any specific browser vendor. We're trying to prioritize based on the needs of all of you, which is the community. So we're maintaining an independent editorial voice, and there's no real fiscal relationship between a sponsor and the writing that we're doing. We're operating in the open source. So all of our meeting notes, all of our governance, all this is public. I'm publishing a monthly work log where the team and I are sharing what we've been working on, what we've done with the money, and what kinds of documentation work we have done. We often work on things that make the web more equitable. So we invest in topics like internationalization, accessibility, or privacy. These are often things that come too short on the documentation effort. And we emphasize diversity inclusion into all of our efforts. So we're hoping to include and onboard more people from all kinds of backgrounds into the documentation community. Now, what are we doing practically? You all probably have heard or visit regularly MDN Web Docs. MDN Web Docs is the main project we're contributing our time to. And it has been started a long time ago by our friends at Mozilla in 2005 as a wiki, when Mozilla was able to kind of open source the original Netscape content and where lots of Mozilla technology was documented and stuff like JavaScript, which originally came out of Mozilla. Since 2017, MDN actually became MDN Web Docs, so there was a little renaming going on there. And MDN became a cross-browser, multi-company effort. So Google, Samsung, Microsoft, and the WWDC joined the MDN Project Advisory Board, and Microsoft even redirected a whole lot of pages from MSDN to MDN. So MDN became a cross-browser neutral resource. And since the beginning of this year, Open Web Docs is also a major collaborator to MDN Web Docs. And if you've been a MDN contributor in the past, like from 2005 to 2019, you might have lived in the wiki world. And this is no longer the case. The lovely engineering team over at Mozilla, they've moved all of MDN to GitHub in December 2020. And since then, the contribution model to MDN has completely changed. And I think for the better, really for the better. So instead of wiki instant editing, we now have pull requests. And so on the mdn/content repository, everyone is encouraged to improve the content by submitting a pull request. This actually means that instead of like Wikipedia style immediate publishing and after the fact moderation, we now first have a pull request. Like you might know, for code, there's a discussion going on. We can actually interact with people. Like there's not just, oh, someone edited a wiki page, now what? No, now there's actually a pull request where we can discuss the changes, improve, and go back and forth and then merge it. It also means that there's no Visivik editor anymore, which had a lot of bugs, which was really painful to work with. It's now possible to use, whatever editor you like, clone the Git repository, and do mass edits or edits as you wish. Some people have already really used the mass edit functionality quite a lot, so we've been cleaning up pages en masse, which was really cool. We can also now test docs and lint them. Like we can apply things like spell checking broadly. We can maybe in the future check our structures and stuff like that. We now have linkable revisions or Git commits, right, that you can actually refer to. So say someone creates a new feature over TC39 and says, well, there's no MDN documentation for this yet. Well, maybe there's a pull request open for it. You can refer to it and talk about it. So this is really cool. And the content, because of the move from the wiki to GitHub, is actually more open. Like it's not trapped in any SQL database anymore. It's content and files, making it much more accessible. And you can make use of previews. So there's a preview in the pull request that you've submitted, and you can also install the MDN renderer locally and have a preview for the changes you're making. Last but not least, MDN is now almost completely in Markdown and not in HTML anymore, which to me as a writer is like tons and tons better than before. Even though I do like HTML and I like to document it, I rather like to write in Markdown. So that is another change that you might have noticed when contributing to MDN web docs. So we were not all sure if this whole move from Wiki to GitHub would turn out great, but I think it did. As I've said, we've converted about 90% to Markdown, which makes a lot easier and better contribution experience. We have over 1,000 people that in the first 10 months of being on GitHub have contributed to MDN web docs. So I'm really glad that there's a renewed community that formerly contributed to the wiki, now contributes on GitHub. And we can engage with those people a lot more because we have actually tools like GitHub comments and so on, the GitHub discussions to interact with these folks. So the contributions have been of greater quality, and there's been lots more engagement, which I'm really proud of. Now, let's talk about what we're actually documenting. So what is in scope for when I say let's document the web platform. So we're talking about the core web technology, so JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all of the web APIs, HTTP and SVG, and related technologies that are web standards. It doesn't mean any frameworks like React or Angular or similar. It doesn't mean any libraries. So MDN and Open Web Docs are really focusing on the core of the web. So basically the things that are standardized in web standards. We also have a few sections on a few disciplines like accessibility, compatibility, performance, privacy, and so forth. So overall, we're talking about 12,000 pages or so that document the web platform. And as we've seen that what Ujwal has shared, more and more features are being imagined and standardized, or it's ever evolving, and the job is never done. All right, let's quickly talk about what is actually documentation. Like, what are these 12,000 pages? And And for this, let's see. Yep. And for this, I like to refer to the documentation system by Daniel Procida of DBO Technologies, who presented the system at PyCon Australia 2017. So I really encourage you to check out this talk. And here he presented the 4 quadrants of documentations, which really relate to me. So basically, good documentation can be structured in 4 components. One component is tutorials that are learning oriented. So these are like a practical few sets of pages that are helpful to you to get to know certain API or concept, like when you're studying. Then there's the how-to guide, which is different to the tutorial in terms of like they're very concise. They have a problem in mind and they tell you how to solve the exact problem at your hand. The other component are explanations. So this is more from a theoretical point of view, telling you more about why do we even have this, what does it achieve, and so on. And then finally, we have the information-oriented pages, which are reference pages. And if you're on MDN every day, you might be one of those people who are mostly on the reference pages like I am. And most of those 12,000 pages actually are reference pages. Those are pages that are really information-oriented and try to give you the information you need really quickly. Now, reference documentation are not specifications. So sometimes I get questions like, why do we even have documentation when people can just read the specs? Well, those are actually 2 really very different things. First of all, the specification is really targeted at implementers and people who like build a JavaScript engine or who have a framework or a library that implements those methods, like the push method that's on the slide here. And so they're really precise. They are referring to algorithms and steps, and to really be exactly clear on what this method does and how to implement it. MDN reference documentation, on the other hand, they're really made for a different audience, for web developers. And so they have a different tone and they try to, be accessible for people that actually write JavaScript as an end user or as authors of websites or apps. So I want to deep dive a little bit into what a typical MDN reference page looks like. So first of all, we have the title or the feature name at the top. We have a short description following after that is really concise and helps you to quickly get an idea of what the thing is. Then we have a larger box that is the interactive example. This is a interactive playground where you can explore and see what the feature, the thing, the method does. And after that, following a quick syntax lookup box, which we've just improved this year to be more simpler and really also to be more copy-pastable, because I know most of you are just going to the reference pages most of the time to remember at which position which parameter was and how to use it and stuff like that. Following is a section on like the parameters and return values and exceptions and so forth. Then afterwards, we usually dive into a larger description and more example codes that give more context and show the method or the feature in a larger block of code. And finally, we refer to the specifications and to the compat table. And so this typical format of a reference page is mostly the same overall of MDN. And thanks to our move to GitHub, we can also be much more enforcing of the structure. And this is really useful because this structured information can actually be used elsewhere. And so, And so we've started a project a few years ago where we've started with looking at documentation more in terms of data. And the first thing we've done here is create a project called BCD, Browser Compat Data. That is taking one structured part of the MDN reference page and turn it into a data structure. And you can get those data points on the MDN Browser Compat Data GitHub repository. It's also available as a NPM package. And so here we really took the information and structured it into JSON and made it available outside of the MDN wiki page, which allowed other projects like the premier source of compat information, caniuse.com, to also make use of this very same data. So by structuring it and making the data available, other projects were able to consume it too. And because of the highly structured reference pages, and we are working more and more to structure other parts, not just the compat data, also IDEs and DevTools are actually able to consume the documentation and bring that into the context of web developers directly. So you don't even have to go to the documentation if, like, the IDE, like WebStorm or VS Code, is able to get that information directly in front of you. Like here, from the typical reference page, we have the feature title and the short description, and we have the CSS form and syntax, and also the compat data, all from like the structured information that the MDN reference page has to offer. So that's really cool. Also this year, we've discovered that we don't have to be the only, or we aren't actually the only people that provide data, and we don't have to do all the work of extracting data out of documentation from our MDN reference pages. But there's also a really cool project from the W3C called WebRef. And here, machine-readable data is available directly from web browser specifications. And of course, because they're directly from the specs, they are even more authoritative than, say, if they are from MDN. And with this project, you can get web IDL information or CSS value definitions, or more data for HTML, SVG, and HTML elements, and other specification metadata. And the future project of ours will be to also integrate the spec data or the data from this repository back into the documentation, so that we also make use of these authoritative data points. But we're also looking forward to work together with the WC to improve this further, so that this data and our data can be used more. All right, so here's my call to action. Help us to contribute to documentation and data. By doing so, you're not only contributing to MDN Web Docs, but you're contributing to tools like IDEs, or maybe someone can write a DevTools extension for your favorite browser to show the compat data or to show some other MDN content. And so, yeah, by contributing to kind of the foundation, to the MDN docs, you're helping many other projects, because MDN is interlinked and works with all of these other things. And so you're really helping to improve the developer experience of millions of people who develop for the web, who do apps and websites and whatnot. So I'm really interested in what kinds of data you would like to consume from documentation, from web standards, so we can make that happen and structure those data and make better documentation. And I'm interested in what kinds of tools you would like to build out of that. And of course, as always, you can help us updating some of the compat data, or write documentation for your greatest and latest favorite web standard that was just shipped. So yeah, thanks for the time, and looking forward to some questions.